This is the Sinclair Radionics System 5000 amplifier. So before Sinclair went into computers and became Sinclair Research, they did audio equipment, and this is, I think, probably the last in the line of the amplifiers they did. I've got the document which came with it here, so it's officially a Sinclair document, and it says Sinclair System 5000 stereo amplifier, and it talks about the connectors on the back, the DIN connectors, and other things within this document. So I'll go over the features of this amplifier. We'll take a look inside as well, but before I do that, I'll take a look at some of the previous models of the Sinclair amplifiers, just as a background as to how it came to this particular model. This is an advert from an electronics magazine in 1972, and it's about the Sinclair Project 60, which is a set of modules which you could buy and make your own hi-fi. So one of the modules is this front panel here, which is the preamplifier with the volume controls and everything. Another module would be this over here, which is the FM radio. If I scroll down a bit, you can see these are the options that are described in the advert here. The Z30 is one of the amplifier types. The Stereo 60 is the front panel. Then there's the FM tuner, which I just showed you as well. So you select the options you want, and then you also have to select a power supply. And I believe the power supply that I've got in my unit is the PZ5, which is the most basic, which is just a smoothing capacitor, a couple of diodes for half-wave rectification, and a transformer. But then you can go for more expensive ones, which is voltage stabilized, and the higher up the amplifiers you have, the more power you can output as well. So if you want to output the highest wattage from your modules, which are the amplifier themselves, you'd need to go for the more expensive power supply. And over on the right here, you can see he's grouped up some things. So you can buy an amplifier by itself, or you buy a pair of these for a stereo, or he's grouped up an amplifier and one of the power supplies for another different price. Or you can buy two of the amplifiers, the Stereo 60 front panel and one of the power supplies for another price. And I'm guessing he's giving you discounts on if you buy groups of things together. But that's basically how the Project 60 worked. Now I've got a Project 80. So here's an advert from an electronics magazine in 1974, and it describes the Sinclair Project 80. So here's the front panel with the audio amplifier, preamplifier I should say. Then there's a FM radio module. There's a stereo decoder for the radio module. And then there's this over here, which is, I think it's a filter, kind of a low band and high pass filter. So scroll down a bit in the advert. And at the bottom here you see that there's the options like there was in the previous advert, but this time for the Project 80 modules. So you can see the control unit, if you want to buy an FM tuner, the decoder, the filter. Then there's the two power amplifier options. Now I've got the Z40 in mine. The Z60 is described in some documentation I read as being backward compatible for the Project 60. So you'd buy a Z60 if you wanted to connect it up to your Project 60 modules. And then there's the power supply units at the bottom. So you buy like a set of modules and you create your own hi-fi system, or the Sinclair actually sold off some of the modules as a pre-built amplifier. So there was the System 2000, System 3000, System 4000, which I've seen. If you search online, you can see examples of those amplifiers. I've got the System 5000 according to my documentation, but I can't find anywhere online at the minute any reference to the System 5000, so it's a bit of an odd one. So on the front of this amplifier is the module, which is the Project 80 module, stereo, and it has the slider controls for volume, bass, treble and volume, and then it has options for selecting the type of input that comes from the back. There's a power light and power switch and headphone socket, which is the large type of headphone socket, and the actual case is actually a custom shape. So the actual front panel, the Project 80 front panel, fits exactly within the case dimensions. And on the back there's a couple of heat sinks which are for the amplifiers inside, and then it's got the inputs for the different types of devices which you might plug into it, like a radio and the cartridge for the turntable and the tape player. And it also has left and right speakers, which are two pin DIN connectors. The mains lead goes in, and also it's got a fuse there, and it's got an earth point here to reduce noise between the different devices if you get hum which is caused between, like an earth loop between the different devices. And the actual lettering is quite professionally put on there, and the holes for all of these are perfectly aligned because they're actually stamped into this. They're not drilled, but the casing holes are stamped. But the thing that I don't really understand about this one is, if you look at the photographs of the System 2000, System 3000 and System 4000, on the back it's got a Sinclair logo, and it's got serial number and device information about the model, but this one doesn't have that, which is strange. It maybe because they didn't have enough space on the back to put it, but I guess they could have put smaller writing in and put it there. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure it is a Sinclair model. It's just unusual they didn't put the writing on the back, because because it fits perfectly within the case, and the case looks like it's designed for it. It doesn't look like it's a home project case. I spent a long time trying to find out how to get into this case as well. I wanted to take the top off, because what I want to do is replace any capacitors in there, because it's from the early to mid 1970s, and I don't want to risk plugging it in without actually replacing the capacitors. So I tried unscrewing some of these things on the back and unscrewing the heat sink bolts, and also any screws I could find on the bottom. I tried unscrewing those, and they just became loose because obviously there's a nut inside which retains them. So I looked under one of the feet as well. I couldn't think of how to get into this. Anyway, it turns out in the end that actually this top is just held on by double-sided sticky tape. Let's see if it's probably re-stuck down again now. So although I didn't apply any more double-sided sticky tape, it actually stuck itself down quite well again. So this just lifts off, and the only thing that's holding it down is double-sided tape along here and along this bit along the front. And inside it's quite simple. So you've got all Sinclair modules. So the actual amplifiers, Sinclair amplifiers. So these are Z40 amplifiers, which are from Project 80. The front panel is the Project 80 front panel with the sliders, and then it's got a module over here which is the power supply module, and just some wiring in between those modules. The power supply module being the PZ5, which is the most basic of the power supply modules, and then you can just see a big capacitor there. And it's got two diodes for half-wave rectification and a transformer as well to convert down to the voltage required, which I think is around 40 volts, 35, 40 volts, something like that. So after having taken the heat sinks off the back, so here's one of the heat sinks, what I'll do when I reassemble is I'll replace better heatsink compound on the boards. But the actual mounts for the amplifiers come away when the heatsink's unscrewed. You can see a Sinclair branded boards for the amplifiers, which are the Z40 amplifiers, and I'll replace these capacitors just to be sure that everything's okay. They're very simple amplifiers. So I've cleaned off all the old heatsink compound, which I'll replace before putting it back together, and I've replaced the capacitors on the PCBs, and I was only able to get a radial capacitor for the big capacitor in the power supply rather than axial, which is a shame. But then again, I found that on the PCB there happened to be some holes where a radio capacitor could actually fit, so I'm not too disappointed about that. I'd prefer not to splay the legs if possible, and lucky enough I didn't have to do that in this particular case. So I'll put the amplifier back together again and switch it on for the first time and see if it actually works. So everything's back together. I'm about to switch on. I've got a couple of speakers connected for left and right. I'm going to play some audio from my phone, but I'm not going to play any music just in case of copyright stuff. So I'll switch it on. I've got all the controls down to minimum so I can turn them up and see what effect they have. I'll just start the audio playing. Okay, so that's very quiet because the volume's right down. I'm going to turn up the volume each side. It's just going to start.
Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy
That's the left.
lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most of the people living on it were unhappy for pretty much at the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper, which is odd, because on the whole it wasn't the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. And so the problem remained. Lots of the people were mean, and most of them were miserable, even the ones with digital watches. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place. And some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. And then, one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, a girl sitting on her own in a small cafe in Rickmansworth suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all the time.
There's a bit of capacitance because it fades out, and so it works fine. There's a bit of crackliness when I'm adjusting some of these controls because I guess there's some dust in the variable resistors. But apart from that, everything seems to be working just fine.